Good morning. My name is Bob. I'm part of the pastoral team here at the meeting place.
Good morning, Bob.
Hi. So, Hildy and I were in our late 20s. We were finally able to act on a dream that we'd had since we started dating, which was to move into the country. We'd purchased 5 acres of bare land. There wasn't even a driveway. And so we had to install the driveway. We had to put in a well. We had to put in a septic field, we had to put in a yard light, and all of these things to get ready. We weren't able to build the house that we designed for the site, but we decided we would live in a mobile home for a few years just to sort of get our life started out in the country. And so we moved that onto the property, and we moved into this incredible place. The first night we were lying in our beds, it was so dark, because there wasn't a light anywhere, and the yard light was at the back of our home, so there wasn't any light into our master bedroom window. It was so dark we could not see the hands in front of our faces, and we thought, this is paradise. This is what we're looking for. Now, our kids were very young at the time, and things were excited, and they were all about this, and we were having this grand adventure as a young family. During that same time, I'd been working for a number of different architects in the city of Winnipeg, and decided it was time to start our own business, and Hildy had been a full-time homemaker, and we thought we could both draw a salary from this business that we would start, and so I started being a consultant to many architects and worked from home eventually, which was a really nice treat to be with our family, especially as the kids were young and I wanted to spend time with them. It was a really great arrangement. And then the early 90s came and a recession hit, and the construction industry in Winnipeg pretty well came to a standstill. So, did the work we could. I made every call that I could to call every client that I had. I literally did everything I could to see if I could find some work somewhere. But finally, the final project that I was working on came to an end, and Hildy and I sat down and we had to take a sobering second look at where things were at, and we discovered that we had in our hands, in our account, a total of $167, and that's all that we had. We had a mortgage payment, we had car payment, we had a young family that we needed to feed, and so what to do? I'll tell you in those moments, as we were Christ followers, desiring to follow him, to honor him in all ways, to be about that, serving in our church and living a life that we thought was pleasing to him, we were troubled by our circumstances. We didn't know how to make sense of them. How would he navigate through this difficult time? How we would find our way? And so during that time, we discovered that for us, money, the ability to say that there is an account that has something in it versus an account that's empty, became really important. And so for us, we realized that money was about security. It was about understanding that we had a way to go forward. I don't know if you've seen your glance or if you've looked in your glance, but please turn there now and pull out this green sheet for a moment. It's called The Meaning of Money. And I would encourage you to take this home with you. And if you're married, make sure that you and your spouse fill out this little questionnaire independent of each other and then get together and have a conversation about the meaning of money. See, here is the thing. What you discover in response to the various statements that are on this little handout is that you have different meanings of money, and here they are. They're listed at the back as you do the tabulation. It's coming. Here they are. Excellent. So the meaning of money. Money might represent for you status. It might represent for you security, as Hildy and I came aware of and discover. It may be all about enjoyment, or it may be about control. And so as you respond to this, you'll get an understanding. And this is a critical thing as a way to be very practical about our finances. You will discover that at times perhaps you are in conflict about decisions around money because your values aren't shared. You have different perspectives. This is something we experience ongoingly, and so I want to encourage you to use this tool. So what do we do? How do we manage finances? Today is our last Sunday in the Challenge Accepted series, which has been all about finances. My hope is this morning that we look very closely at how to manage our finances and find intersections with faith. What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus and manage our finances? And so we're going to get really very specific. You will have seen, perhaps, that there are 5 stools that are on the stage. They have on them a series of water bottles, and I will use those to try to illustrate how it is that our budget is assembled. And I'll tell you, this is how this came about. Some years ago, Dean Russell assembled this resource for us here at the meeting place. Now, over the last number of Sundays, so many of these copies have gone out that we've now had to hang on to the few that remain, because we need them for a financial workshop which is starting tomorrow evening for the next 4 weeks on Monday evenings at 7 p.m. Jenny is our Director of Operations. She will lead that. So if you need to figure out how to manage your finances, show up tomorrow night. Be sure to tap into this resource, and she will use these books. We also give these books to couples that we're spending time with as we prepare them for marriage. And so we have hung on to the few remaining copies. We're going to see if we can get more of these in the future. So here's the thing. When this first came out, Hildy and I decided to test it. We're always curious. We wanted to see how this thing would play in our own lives. And so we worked through this over a number of days, and we came to page 78, which is near the end of the book, and it has on it a summary of a budget with all the lines attached. And it looked quite similar to the way that we had structured our budget in our home. So we thought, this is a really good tool. I think this might really help us. The addition that is in this book, in this resource, is that the budget lines are categorized into 5 categories, which are represented by these 5 stools. And we were really excited about this because it gave us a chance to look at our budget in its whole and then break it into the individual parts to see how it is that we were actually spending our money. And so I will use the categories created in this resource to walk us through a budget. So here we are. The very first stool is all about giving. So we're going to see the slide here. This is going to describe all the various stools. So giving, saving, need, want, and debt. So now it's difficult to understand what all of our specific financial circumstances may be about. So allow me to use the visual here as a scenario of what a financial picture may look like. So in the teaching here at the meeting place, we have always encouraged 10% tithe. This idea that we give 10% to the cause, the meeting place. Perhaps there's other agencies that we wish to support. Each one of these water bottles, by the way, represents 5% to give you a sense of the distribution. So 10%. However, in this series, you've received some excellent teaching by both John and Paul, who've given us a lot of insight into it. And one of the things you will have discovered is that 10% is really a good start. So the idea that perhaps we would offer more than 10% in our giving is something that you've heard from this stage in this series, and so represented by a 15% commitment to giving. Now, what do I want to say about giving? Well, here's the thing that strikes me about giving. In some ways, it's about understanding our motivation, understanding what is it that would drive us to say we want to contribute, you want to give to agencies outside of our own. And so on the column of giving, you will find that there are 5 motivators that you and I use that actually help us or prompt us to contribute. I won't go into a lot of detail about these 5, but they're up there for you to see. But I want to make this comment about giving. You see, the opening premise is that we tend to look at the resources that we've received and believe that we have control over them. We believe that we are the owners of them, that we get to do something with them. We have deciding authority about these things. And when it comes to these resources, we start off with this idea that this is a basket full of things that we've collected for our distribution. But if we change our minds about how this resource actually becomes available to us, it could be helpful for us to become more generous in our own mindsets. You see, the God that we serve, the God that created the environment in which we live, is generous in nature. Let me illustrate this by using this particular verse out of Psalm 24. This is what it says: "The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it, for he founded it on the seas and established it on the waters." Here's a verse that simply says everything that we see, everything that is available in life is actually God's. And then in this verse, there's a curious reference that reminded me of creation. And so I don't have the text up for you, but I want to show this or read this to you. In Genesis chapter 1, in verse 6, it says this: "And God said, 'Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water.' So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening, there was morning, the second day. Then the next verse says, and God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place and the dry ground appear. And it was so. So at the very point of the start of creation, when everything sort of came to be, there's three things that came to be very specifically in this particular time when God created these specific things. He created the separation between the water and what he then called sky, which means he introduced to us oxygen. We have water, then we have the separation of land and water. So we have these three things. Have you considered for a moment that all three of those things were given to us in their entirety? This is not an installment plan. All the oxygen that we would ever need in the history of the world was created at that very moment. Do you realize that you and I are breathing in the air that has been available from the beginning of time? In some ways, we're breathing in the DNA of all the smart people that lived before us. We should really be impressed by this. The idea is that there's only ever been one source of oxygen. And of course, it cycles through, and we understand the importance of plants to clean this oxygen and make it available. But no new oxygen has been added. It was entirely given to us by God at that very first moment. The same is true of water, right? And we understand the cycle of water, how it rises up into the air in condensation and vapor form, and it rains down onto the ground, and it fills the groundwater and fills our lakes and streams. We've only ever had one source of water. It's not been added to. It has been given to us entirely at the beginning of time. And land is the same. We've been given a certain land mass, certain materials, raw resources that we've been entrusted with. In fact, the marching orders to the first humans that God created were to manage all of these resources. And so you and I have access to all of the material that has ever been needed for world history. Illustrated very simply, when I step into our backyard and I lift up our compost container, I'm always amazed by this. I understand how it works, but it's still something to see. That is, I add my banana peels and my eggshells and my vegetable leftovers and some grass clippings and some leaves and all of these things into this bin. And what happens is over time, if I stir it and add some water and let the heat sort of really do its thing, what you find at the bottom is more soil that you then get to add to the garden. It's been enriched, it has nutrients and so on like that. And so all of these things point to us that we live in a world that is filled with resources that are given to us by God for our use. They've been given to us in their entirety, and all we get to do is be stewards of these resources for a time. We don't ever really own them. We're just using them during our lifetime and then leaving them for the people that will follow. And so this is a way for us to look at how we might engage in the practice of giving if we have an understanding that the resources entrusted to us really are only given to us for a time as a resource. It's lent, borrowed to us for us to invest in very deliberate ways. So the practice of giving is part of how we engage and recognize the incredible gift that God has provided. To recognize the generosity He's extended to us and for us to become generous in our own way. We move on to the second category. There's another verse that would describe the saving piece. So here we go. Jesus is teaching. And he makes this comment. This is something we're very familiar with. Let me illustrate. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. If you want to turn this to a positive sentence, it would be, if you want to follow me, if you want to be about my cause, then it's going to cost you something. It's going to demand something of you. And this is something we're familiar with. If you and I want to do something, if we want to be about something, if you want to move into the country, it means some certain decisions. If you want to run in a marathon, it means you have to start training. If you want to accomplish anything, it's about an investment on your side to prepare for that time when that event will come your way. And so Jesus is using this to say, if you want to follow me, if you want to be in relationship with me, I'm not going to hide this from you. I'm not going to pretend it's all going to be simple and all you're going to do is get. No, he's saying it's going to require an investment on your part. And so the meeting place has used this as language to shape our current vision statement, which is to reorder our lives for the compassionate cause of Jesus. We understand it's going to require a set of actions on our part to be about this as we desire to honor him. And this is what describes saving for us. Jesus goes on to use a very simple illustration. So in this instance, we have a person who wants to build a tower. We don't know what for, but he wants to build a tower. Perhaps to look over on his neighbor's yard. Or maybe he wants to build a tower because he lives by the sea and he wants to see the boats way out there. I'm not sure what he wants this tower for, but here it is. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Right? These awkward circumstances, when you start something, you can't finish it because you've run out of funds. This notion of saving, this notion of preparing and saying, are there some things that we want to be about in the future that we invest that very deliberately? And again, the teaching from the stage has been, you set aside 10% of your budget to be about this. And in fact, the sooner you start, the better it is, right? Because what you do today has influence over tomorrow. So whatever the project may be, and I'm not sure what projects you anticipate, but there's some exciting things that I want to be about. And so for us to set aside money is a really good thing. And what an incredible thing when finally the day comes for you to purchase the thing or for you to experience that thing that you prepared for and you have the resources in place. Here's the curious one. It's a little side note. In this book, when I first came across it, I was going to call up Dean and I said, Dean, you're going to fix something because I think there's a mistake. In this book, a vacation fund fits into the saving category. Now, you and I, that makes sense to us, right? Because you'd think you'd have to save if you're going to plan for a bigger vacation of some kind. But really, in my head, I'm thinking vacation fits into the want category. But then I realized, if I look back at the creation account, that what happened at the end of all the things that God created, there was a day of rest. Imagine he creates human beings, he gives them their marching orders and says, this is how I would like you to spend your time. You are to be good stewards of all these resources. And you would think that he would say, and tomorrow morning we're going to get up early at 5 a.m. and let's get busy with it. But instead, he says, and now we rest. This idea that you and I, in the busyness of our life, take time to actually have rest is really important. In our culture, we still have Sundays for the most part set aside for this purpose. It's gotten a little unclear because, of course, work schedules and the kinds of demands on our lives have changed that. But there are leftover evidence of the fact that there is this idea that there are cycles and patterns of the way that we are to live. And part of our savings are about preparing for a time when we can catch a breath. Think about a moment, and many of you have traveled way more places than I have. Think about the things that you have learned about God when you've gone to a place that isn't anything like Winnipeg. Think about the generosity that you experienced in that moment. And so savings includes a vacation fund. Isn't that great news? I think it's great news. Okay, we get to the third category. Need. Notice how full that is. I was a little confronted looking at our finances and I'm thinking, this is a lot of need. Like, that's a little crazy, isn't it? Now, what are the need categories? Well, you see the column up here tells you all the things that are about need. These are some basic things, right? One of the very first things is shelter, whether you're paying mortgage or rent. The thing is, you and I, we live in a city where if we don't have shelter in winter, we're going to die. Right? So this notion that there are some needs, that are some things that define our life is very clear. This is not something that is a surprise. This is not a surprise to God either. He's not looking at this going, needs? You have needs? How many of the promises that he makes are about connecting to our needs? This is a profound experience in our life to recognize there are some things I need. I need clothes. I need food. A phone is included. I know. How can we ever live without a phone? You might say, well, that's a luxury item. But I would say that in this lifetime, like, in order for us to stay in touch, how will I receive pictures of my grandchildren if I don't have a phone? Come on. We need a phone, right? I need a phone. This is a desperate thing. Needs. Here's a verse written by Peter, who was one of the followers of Jesus. He writes in his letter in the New Testament, in chapter 2, he says this, his divine power, he's speaking here about Jesus, has given us everything we need for a godly life. I checked. The original language really clarifies that everything we need for a godly life includes everything. There's nothing excluded. This is the whole package. This includes the needs that we have in life. This includes the physical, material things. This includes our money resources. It says everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. And here again, recognize the incredible generosity. Through these, he has given us his very great and precious promises. And the verse goes on to describe some incredible things. Everything about the attitude about God when it comes to these things is about generosity. He's created for us an environment that allows us to experience something extraordinary. He's understanding that there are resources in life that are needed. There's giving opportunities, there's saving opportunities, but there's also needs. And for us to recognize what these are. Needs are part of the picture. Notice that these things have spiritual elements connected to them. We don't separate the money out of our life and say, well, there's a lot of things that are spiritual, like prayer and compassion and forgiveness and grace. When it comes to money, that's something that happens almost independent of all of that. No, it is linked, it is intertwined. So we get to the fourth category. I'm a little embarrassed about this one. 15%. What are wants? Well, look at the list. It's entertainment, it's eating out, it's gifts, home decor, education. This is not the kind that you require for a career advancement. This is the kind, I think I'll just take a course in macrame, just because I can. Some of you don't even know what macrame is. Wants. There are things in your life and mine that we purchase. We don't need them. They're frivolous. They're not important. Well, they're important, but they're not like critical to life. But it's a category that we need to name. Right? I think about some of the spending that I have done that is just about, I really would like that. And that's it. Here's a verse that speaks about that. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Notice again the generosity factor. You notice how big this is? Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. All of that is about saying, like life that he imagines for us can be quite grand. And then he says this, take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Now, I'm very aware, it doesn't just say, and he will give you the desires of your heart. There's a connection here, take delight in the Lord. In other words, there's a connection. Once again, our want category, even though we may say, well, clearly this one doesn't have any spiritual emphasis to it, it's not true. This too has a spiritual significance attached to it. It's about our wants, but it is this, take delight in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. I will illustrate it this way. As a parent, have you ever gone and bought a gift for your child? And you know that this is not a gift that's going to, set them up for a future career in some grand money-making scheme. This is not a gift like a pair of socks, which is very practical. That goes into the clothing need thing. This is a frivolous gift, but everything about the gift says, I love you. I went to the store to buy this for you specifically. I'm giving this to you, and the only thing that you should know about this is that this is meant for you to enjoy because I know how much pleasure you would take in it. And that's it. There's no strings attached other than that. If you can imagine that, and you've been in that situation, and I know I have been, and it's an incredible thing to be able to do, I think we're getting close to the heart of God. This is, I think, how he sees things. This is how generous he would want to be with us. To say, I want you to have some things that are just good. When I've climbed the volcano in Guatemala, when I've come around the corner and seen the Hubbard Glacier, when I've walked the beaches of Denmark, when I've stared from Masada down into the Dead Sea and then was able to float in it, all of those places I didn't need to see. I didn't need to spend the money to get there. This is just literally the generosity of God to say there are places in this world that he's created that are so beautiful they must be seen, and it's a simple gift to say, I created this for you to understand that I've made this beautiful and I love you. That's how I receive it. I actually believe that the waterfalls that I encounter on my canoe trips are an emotion detector. When I arrive, they start running. And when I'm gone, they stop. It's not true, right? Because that waterfall flows even if I'm not there, and it gives glory to God. It worships him. How many waterfalls have I not yet seen? I'm curious about the next one. All of that is about the goodness of God. It's about wants. This is somewhat frivolous if you want. Well, here's the thing. Because of that connection to delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart, Hildy and I have a very simple principle when it comes to our wants. And that is that when we make a purchase that seems to be primarily just about something that we want, we drive it through one more filter, which is, can we agree that when we make this purchase, that it will be a blessing to others, that we will share it with other people? I made this observation in a setting with a bunch of young adults in our home, and one of the people noticed that we had upgraded our TV. It was no longer one of these big boxes. It was this sleek LED screen. And this young adult had cheek enough to say to me, "Can I take your TV home with me because you've decided to share everything that you've purchased?" I wasn't smart enough in the moment to say, no, you can come over anytime and watch the Jets game if you'd like, but the TV is staying here. But the idea is to share. I'll give you a very quick example that we've experienced recently. We had a series here called Who Do You Say I Am? And we invited the artists of this faith community to create pictures, arts, that reflected their perspective of who Jesus was. These are not professional artists. These are people that go to the hobby store and they buy canvases and paint and brushes and turpentine and whatever else they need, just for the sheer pleasure of being able to paint and create. But in that moment, they took this hobby that they've invested resources and time in, and they blessed this faith community by sharing those images with us. This is a way for us to say, if there is a want category, can we also recognize its spiritual significance? And there it is. We get to the fifth stool. You'll notice it's empty. It hasn't always been empty for Hildy and I. In fact, it wasn't empty not that long ago. And we had to make some very deliberate decisions to say, we're going to get rid of, and this is consumer debt. I'm not talking about mortgage and car payments. I'm talking about sponsoring some of the expenses of life that we've incurred that are based on poor decisions or perhaps irresponsibility or perhaps a generosity that we couldn't afford. Imagine for a moment what happens when there is consumer debt in our life. It makes things very complicated, right? First thing that happens is we really don't have a chance to do anything with wants. In fact, truth be told, this category is mostly filled by debt that's connected to our wants. If it gets really bad, we start noticing that it's affecting our needs. We're starting to have to make choices as far as the kind of groceries we're buying. We can't go to restaurants anymore. Very good chance that we're not going to worry about savings anymore because we can hardly afford to live a life. And then we have this crazy thing, and that is instead of being other-minded and experiencing the generosity of God, our life is so filled with the weight of debt that we cannot even for a moment imagine being generous because we can't afford our own life. And so the idea of giving some away seems irresponsible. And what happens is suddenly this debt category influences everything else that's going on. Here's a verse in Proverbs that's quite sobering. That's about this. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Right? This is enslavement. We become captured by these things. Oh, you say this is a terrible way to end. Why did the fifth stool have to be about this? Right? This is a negative, sort of a dark note. Well, here, this is where I want to say to you that once again, the generosity of God comes to play. So throughout, we discover over and over again that the heart of God is for us to experience extraordinary things. So when I first decided to become a follower of Jesus, at that particular moment, I would say that my decision-making capacity and the way that I conducted myself in relationship with Him wasn't precisely what He had in mind. Because I was still unlearning the habits of my former life. I was still making decisions that weren't entirely driven by Him. And so it takes time. I'm in my mid-50s now, and I'm still being shaped by God. I'm still learning from Him. He's still desiring to have some things in my life look different than they look, because I'm in some ways clinging to my former human nature, and He's inviting me to something grander. He wants me to experience the freedom of what that looks like. And this is the beauty of this. If this is true in our lives, guess what? He says to us, be responsible now. This is your moment to act and say, do something about this. Yes, the other things are compromised for a time, but do something about this. Be responsible. Take a step. And here's my recommendation. John spoke, when he spoke about the tithing and about debt, he talked about first fruits. And I would encourage you to do this. And if you turn into your glance, you'll see there is another insert. This one is yellow. It's about recurring giving. About 40% of the monies that come into the meeting place come to us via recurring giving, which is simply the practice of people having made a commitment to say, on a regular basis, we will see money leave our account to support the work of the meeting place. Here's your chance. Perhaps the debt is overwhelming to you. But as a declaration to say, I want to be faithful with what's been entrusted to me. I want to live with a generous mindset. I want to believe that it's true, that God has the resources that we need. And you make a commitment in this recurring giving. Fill out this form, bring it to the info center so that you can start in your life, in your way of capturing your finances to make a contribution. And you know what this does for you? Not only does it make a declaration about what it is you desire to communicate to God, but it also connects you to a community. You're a contributing member to a larger gathering of people. You're no longer on your own. You're saying, despite my difficult circumstances, I want to be about this. And some of you have been on this recurring giving plan for some time. Is it time to review that? Perhaps as you're looking at the visual, you're thinking, you know what, I think maybe there's a little bit more room and for you to revise the number. Here's the option, the simplest option. There's a pencil probably in the pocket in front of you. Write down your name and write down your email. Bring it to the info center. Jenny will call you, and you can talk about the details afterwards. But the idea is for us to be invited, as far as our finances are concerned, make a declaration today to say, I am taking ownership, and I want to move into a better experience when it comes to my finances. And so what happens is that these things become distributed the way they need to be. We start seeing the possibility of savings. We can begin to be generous again, and this will fill our life with the joy of knowing that we can support causes that are important to us. And guess what? Perhaps sometime you can afford to buy the cherry on the top of the sundae. Be blessed.
Okay, so I think that it was great the way that you set this up, that's kind of like puts things in perspective. It's kind of like a nice plan. So we have some questions that are relevant to almost all of these pillars.
Okay.
So we'll start with giving. Is the taking up your cross scripture about savings and money, or is it really about investing in the investment required in following Jesus? So is this scripture about savings and about money, or is it really about investing in Jesus?
It's about both, right? Because the truth of the matter is, like any time that we're about something, if we're saying yes to one thing, we're saying no to a series of other things. And so to say yes to Jesus requires that we are fully about his cause. Mm-hmm. And one of those pieces is for us to invest the resources that have been entrusted to us in our lifetime. And so giving is part of that. Are there other disciplines of that? Like, are we to express grace and love into our world as a result of following Jesus? Absolutely. I just don't want us to separate our money from the other things that we can so easily label to be spiritual practices. And so I believe that taking up our cross, in some instances, I would say, even in my own life, as Hildy and I have managed our finances, there have been times when commitments we've made to a financial cause, whether it's an ongoing contribution to a sponsor child or like a project at a church environment, there's been times when it's been hard to keep up with that. And so it does feel like it is a hardship, which I think sometimes we associate with cross. But I wouldn't separate the two. So.
Okay, still about giving. So you mentioned a time in your life when you only had $150 in the bank. Mm-hmm. So how do you give 10% when you only have so little? Do we adjust our giving based on how much we have coming in?
Well, my encouragement is to do that. I think at the end, I really do feel that our giving is still a declaration in our confidence in God, like that he will provide. So in those circumstances, just to finish the story, clearly I'm here today. We didn't perish, right? But it required me to do the kind of work that I wasn't necessarily thinking about doing. I actually worked for a farmer for a number of weeks to find some income. I did whatever I could to make sure that I could keep up with my responsibilities. But I will say, because Hildy and I, when it comes to the motivation on giving, for us the motivation is obedience. It doesn't actually matter what the cause is. It doesn't matter what the need is. We don't need that inspirational piece. We just believe that God calls us, and so we give out of obedience. And can I tell you that when we were down to $167, that we took $1 or $16.70 and gave it? I don't think it was that specific, but I think our commitment to contribute continued, even though we were in a very difficult spot.
Cool, that makes sense. Savings now. So you talk about the vacation in the savings. So this actually elicited quite a few questions. what do you think about the importance of taking a vacation when I'm not yet tithing 10%? So you talked kind of about vacation as being rest. So I guess the question kind of is vacation and rest the same thing? And do we take vacations even when if we need rest, but we're not yet giving the 10%?
Right. Well, I'm not going to give you a hard answer on this one. I do think, though, that I think the fact that you're asking the question, like that the questions are coming in, I think is very useful. This, I think, is the purpose of a series like this, for us to take a closer look and say, like, where is our money going? And perhaps it'll happen where you'll say, boy, we're putting a lot of money towards vacation, but really we're not functioning very well, our debt isn't disappearing, we're not able to contribute to causes as we would like, and so perhaps you'll make an adjustment. How you respond, I think, is in your hands. I'm simply suggesting that we sometimes have in this life a scarcity attitude. There isn't enough, right? And even this represents some generosity, right? There will be people who have so way less than this, and so for them the categories are even hard to figure out how to assign resources to them. So if you're confronted by, should you take a vacation when you're not able to give, well, ask Jesus. That's a guilt message, I'm sorry. That's not what he intends to send.
Okay, let's talk about wants. So this one here. How can we make sure that the things that God has given us, so the money and the things that we're allowed to spend our wants on, don't distract us from God himself?
Right.
Because you talk about wants as being this gift from God, right?
Yes. Well, this is where my invitation is for us to see the capacity to be able to invest in things that perhaps are frivolous. And the problem is that we live in a world where I think we pass judgment on each other very quickly. So like, for example, in the category of needs, I say car. Well, some of us drive expensive cars that cost a lot of money. Some of us drive cheaper cars that cost less money. So we do, in fact, in some ways, do look at each other. And so we feel and perhaps often find ourselves judging, or at least making observations about the way people live, which isn't very helpful. I think we need to dismiss that and say, that's not ours to worry about. We should look at our own circumstances. So when it comes to wants, I recognize that there are things in my life that I have purchased that someone might say, but there are starving children in places in the world. There are people who are suffering. How is it that you give yourself this permission? And that's why I want to connect it to saying, if I'm going to spend in this category, then I want it to have and make a contribution to the community that's of benefit to other people. I did not choose, by the way, to be born and live in Winnipeg. So I arrived here not by choice. There are places in this world where you can live with very different shelter requirements, very different car requirements, very different food requirements that would allow a different thing. So I think what happens is we have to sort our world in the world that we've been placed in. In our world, is there room in our wants? I said that perhaps I was embarrassed about the 15%. Like maybe it should be less. Perhaps I would like to see more of this go over this way. But the truth of the matter is I am now, having looked at it and confronted by this and saying, I can now begin to make a choice. But I do think that this is a reflection of the generosity of God. And I will tell you, there are things in creation that do not need to be the way they are. If God just wanted to create a functioning environment, a laboratory, if you want, for us to live in, he could have. Why is he so extravagant in the way that he's created this world? And I think there has to be confidence and extravagance in life because I think it's a reflection of who he is. And so therefore the want category exists, and that's the way I make sense of it in my world.
Great. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks.
First, I want to say that there was a ton of questions today, and we won't be able to get through all of them, but there was also a lot of encouragement. So this water bottle thing really spoke to a lot of people. It was very useful. Yeah.
Good.
So that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question about giving.
Yes.
So many people in this community are students. They have debt and very limited income. How does this distribution work for people who don't have a lot of income and they're paying to go to school?
Yes. Well, I would say that first of all, I think it's about sorting and making the answers that suit your particular circumstance. But I will say this also, and that is we know that people who make it a practice to be disciplined in their giving, even when their resources are very limited, create very healthy patterns for the future. So if there's this idea that I won't give yet because I don't have the resources, but I will start someday, that entry point is really difficult to reach. Because what happens is we, generally speaking, in our humanity, live to the ceiling of our means and perhaps just somewhat beyond. And so in order for you to, in fact, ensure that there is a generosity expression in your life, it's good to practice this even if your resources are limited. And I would say, like, okay, so 10 or 15% is something we've spoken about on this stage. Maybe it's not that. Maybe it's a different portion, but it is a practice that simply introduces a good discipline that will serve you well in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So let's talk about wants.
Yeah, everyone's favorite category. Yeah.
Yes. So can you speak to a little bit of the difference between needs and wants? It seems that, this person said, it seems that we often justify our spending as a need, so buying a bigger house or a second car or some fancy clothes. So how do we separate our actual needs from our wants? And also in the context of knowing that we live in the top 1% of the world. So many of our needs are actually other people's wants in other places.
Yeah. Well, let's be very clear, okay? And I'll use sort of my own life to explain some of this. I did not choose to live in Winnipeg. It's my parents who chose that I should arrive here and live in North America. And I understand that the distortion of needs and wants compared to many other places in the world is unique to our culture, and it's different where we are now versus other people. There are places in the world where the kind of shelter requirements that we have here are very different. There are places in the world where food costs much different. It's just a different circumstance. So in some ways, I find myself in these circumstances and say, okay, in this place that I've been placed, how do I make the best decisions? How do I sort that out? So we've identified need as shelter and cars. Phone is on that list and so on like that. You may say, well, I don't see that as a need. Well, if you don't see that as a need and you see that in your want category, then place it there in your own processing. Because at the end of the day, we have to come to terms with where we spend our resources and decide how it is that we want to actually spend our resources. And if I happen to put something in the want category that you may put in another category, or a need that you have in your category that you want to hear, however you organize it, this is really just an invitation for you to look at your money. And especially if you do the meaning of money exercise, you may say, you know what my highest value is? Let's say enjoyment. But part of that enjoyment may be to see, there are people who are hungry in the world. There are people who they're just victims of a catastrophe of some kind. And I am determined to send more of my resources there. In fact, that would give me the greatest sense of that I'm spending my resources in a way that pleases me and that I feel is in line with what I'm called to do. And you have that permission. I think you need to arrange that in your mind to suit you. And so, in some ways, I'm being quite honest about how I arrange my own things. You can be critical of that. And in that instance, I would say this is one of the tricky things when it comes to money. We can talk about all the subjects. Money gets complicated, and the reason is because we so easily pass judgment on one another. And I would say take judgment out of it altogether. Don't even worry about the people around you, but look at your own circumstance and say, what is it I would like to do so that it's aligned with the values that I have? And my values may not be the values of another person, and you may be confronted by that, you may be challenged by that, you may want to speak to them about it. Then I would ask you to be in relationship with the person, so when you speak into it, that you're doing it out of a place of love and grace and desire for truth, but not harmful or dismissive or any of those kinds of things, prejudicially, if you want. So that would be a start anyways.
Great. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for being here this morning. It's been great to have this time together. I hope that as John and Paul and I shared this morning, that you will have gained some tools that will be really informative for us to begin to make really good decisions about our resources. I ask, lean in quickly. Don't let this pass by. This will fade from memory very quickly. So perhaps assign some time in your own schedule to say, I want to take a closer look and see where things are at, to see if maybe I want to rearrange some of the way I conduct myself financially. I do want to encourage you. Scripture, I gave you some evidence today, but Scripture is full full of the evidence of the generosity of God. And I turn to creation for that insight. There are things that are part of the world that we live in that, if you want, are frivolous. They're unnecessary. They are literally just a sign and an indication of the kind of generosity that God has. To say, do I need to create this many species of trees? They could probably live with fewer, but he decides there's a great variety. You name it, you look at any part of creation, you think to yourself, like, why would he have gone to so much trouble to create that thing? Was it really necessary? Well, he did not create us to live in a sterile laboratory. He created an incredible place that is a reflection of his character. So when you look at your finances, could I encourage you to look at it from the perspective of generosity, to say, what am I able to do, versus a scarcity perspective that says, I can't do anything. And look at it from another perspective, because this would be his desire for us. Is there injustice in the world? Are the distribution of resources where they should be? Absolutely not. This is why this category exists, because we're in a position to share with those who have less access. This is a responsibility that we have, and don't miss out on that. But it comes out of generosity. It comes out of a generosity that God provides for us. So be blessed. If you want to have a conversation about that, or pray with somebody about anything else that may be true in your life, please do come forward. There are people prepared at the front of the stage to do that with you. Be blessed this week. We'll see you next Sunday.